Why do millions of very fine Christians still believe in predestination, though the New Testament has so many verses plainly discarding such a teaching? Not all Calvinists believe that horrible idea that infants one day will writhe in flames of everlasting fire, but hyper-Calvinists do, and they are often the pick of the bunch, make wonderful neighbours. Well, why do they believe such a thing? Answer: because traditions stick like glue. It's even true in science. This is a great book by Thomas Kuhn on the structure of scientific revolutions. On page 77, he tells us that science has its traditions and they're hard to budge. Here I quote: "A scientific theory is declared invalid only if an alternative candidate is available to take its place. The decision to reject one paradigm is always simultaneously the decision to accept another." Very true. Popular ideas on evolution are now being challenged all around the scientific world, but science as a whole will not budge. Religion is worse than science. Tradition rules in most denominations. Have you ever heard of the Westminster Confession? Perhaps the most famous religious creed of all time. It belongs to the 17th century, about 1640, though it took years to complete, and none of the folks working on it stayed the whole distance, and there were many disputes and many disagreements. But today, Orthodox Presbyterians, many Congregationalists, some Baptists and others cling to the Westminster Confession as though it was the Bible. I know a very wonderful seminary on the east coast of America. It was founded by great Christian saints, and all its history, it's had wonderful professors. But that great seminary still teaches predestination and infant baptism, though the New Testament is very much opposed to both ideas. All denominations have their traditions to which they stick as though glue. The fifth largest Christian group on the planet is one with whom I have great sympathy, for they have many good teachings and they've given up some of the old traditions like everlasting hellfire and infant baptism, etc. But they have their traditions too. The fifth largest Christian group on the planet believes that the year 1844 is a prophetic date from Daniel 8:14, and that at that time Christ began a final work of atonement from moving from one part of the heavenly temple to another. Now, no other Christian group on earth believes such. Forgive me, I nearly used the word rubbish. But Acts 1 and verse 7 says that Christians should not try to find dates, times or seasons. The whole New Testament assumes that if the church had been faithful, the second advent would have come long ago. Read it closely. You will find it is so. When you read the book of Hebrews, the last verses, chapter 6, say that Christ, and it uses the symbolism of the Old Testament, went through the veil into the presence of God. at his ascension, not in 1844. Hebrews 9, Hebrews 10 teach that the first department of the Jewish sanctuary typified the Old Testament age. But after the veil, the second department, symbolic of the New Testament age. I know most of the top scholars of this group, fine people, but most of them over half a century ago gave up this idea of 1844. But if they said it publicly, they would lose their job. This group is not alone. Wonderful people, teach many great things. I have great sympathy for them. But they're clinging to a tradition that came from William Miller, the Baptist preacher of the 19th century, who said Christ would come back in 1844. When it didn't happen, those who wanted to cling to the date had to find another answer. So they invented a special atonement. Whole New Testament says the atonement took place at the cross. Bible knows nothing about dates, New Testament times. But all denominations run the same risk. The Church of Latter-day Saints, although its Book of Mormon has been exposed as a fraud many times, they still cling to it, they still teach it. Jehovah's Witnesses, earnest people, many of them were put to death in World War II by Adolf Hitler. They were brave, they were courageous. But for about 100 years, they've clung to the date 606 BC as the date when Jerusalem was destroyed by the Babylonians. No real scholar on earth or historian or archaeologist believes that. The destruction took place years before. They want it so they can get to 1914 for another wrong belief. Traditions stick like glue. But there are some groups that have had courage to diverge from their traditions. The Worldwide Church of God, ruled with an iron fist by Herbert Armstrong for years. When he died, they threw out a lot of the rubbish that he taught. They lost half the church. But I esteem them for their courage in repudiating error. The Roman Catholic Church has done similarly in a number of areas. Many years ago, when Roman Catholics wrote on Luther, they wrote very harshly about him, pictured him as a very wicked man. Very rare they do that today. Most Roman Catholic scholars writing on Luther today never make that mistake. They picture him as a good man. Take the doctrine of Protestantism, justification by faith alone. Council of Trent denied that. They said justification meant you're good inside, as well as being accepted just as you are. Nowadays, the best Roman Catholic scholars reject that. They've allied themselves with many Protestants in teaching that salvation comes just by accepting the gift, even though in ourselves we are still sinners. That we come with all our infirmities, with all our sins, and believing in Jesus, we're accepted in the Beloved. That's justification by faith. And many Roman Catholic scholars teach it today. And so, my friends, I need to look at my own traditions, and you'll be tempted to write me and correct me and condemn me. Don't yield to that temptation. My program is too full to do you justice. But look at your own traditions, and I say to you today, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. If any man is willing to do God's will, he shall know of the doctrine. God bless you.